All right, now that we understand fractional reserve banking, we can now delve into how it is that the Federal Reserve System, how they're able to manipulate the money supply, and or how they're able to have such a large impact on the money supply. See, the truth of the matter is the central bank does not have to, when they manipulate the money supply, they don't have to put the amount of money into the money supply that they want it to go up by. So if they want the money supply to go up by, let's say, $100 billion, they don't have to put $100 billion into the money supply. And if they want to take $50 billion out of the money supply, they don't have to grab and take $50 billion out of the money supply. What they do is they manipulate the money supply through a process that is called money creation. And money creation is how the money supply increases. And then there's the opposite effect, which we're going to call money destruction. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain to you the money creation process first, then we can understand the idea of money destruction, okay? All right, so money creation, let's get a definition for money creation. A chain reaction of lending and depositing of money resulting in an increase in an economy's money supply. Okay, so a chain reaction. A chain reaction is basically like a series of similar events. One thing happens, then it sets off the next round of maybe something very similar happening, then it sets off the next round, then it sets off the next round, and you have this over and over and over again. Well, what is this chain reaction? Well, this is a chain reaction of lending and depositing of money. So, money is deposited, then lent, then deposited, then lent, then deposited, then lent, okay? And here's the idea, and I alluded to this in a previous segment. So what's happening is somebody deposits money in the bank, right? So they deposit money into their bank, let's say Bank A. Then that bank loans out money to a borrower, right? The borrower spends the money and it goes to some other depositor, okay? So they spend the money, then whoever received the money, they're now a depositor and they put their money into their bank, Bank B. Then Bank B loans out the money to another borrower. Then that borrower, they spend the money and it goes to another depositor. Then that depositor deposits the money into their bank, Bank C. Then Bank C loans that money out to another borrower. Then that borrower spends the money and it goes to another depositor. And then that depositor puts their money into their bank, which is a completely different bank, which is Bank D. Bank D now loans some of that money out to a borrower, okay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is a chain reaction. And it all started with this person depositing money into their bank. When they deposited money into their bank, that bank then loaned out some of that money. They spent the money. The recipient of that money then put their money in their bank, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's going to keep going, okay? And through this process, through this chain reaction of lending and depositing, see, we have lending and depositing, lending and depositing, lending and depositing. Through this chain reaction of lending and depositing of money, the result of the whole thing is an increase in an economy's money supply, okay? And the process, we call the process money creation, or the money creation process. So I'm going to give you a list of what happens whenever money is deposited into a bank. So I'm going to say every time money is deposited into a bank, First, money gets deposited. Okay, so let's say, for example, that somebody deposits $1,000 in their bank. Okay, so somebody deposits $1,000 in bank one, okay, in their bank, which is bank number one. Okay, all right, after that happens, a fraction of that money is held in reserve. Okay, so let's say in this particular case, let's say that the reserve ratio is 10%. Okay, so 10% reserve ratio. So that means that bank one is going to hold back $100. Okay, so $100 will be held back. Okay, go. All right. Then the remainder of that money is going to be lent out to borrowers. All right, so what is the remainder? $1,000 is deposited in bank one, $100 is held back. Therefore, $900 is going to be lent out. Okay, so lend out $900. Okay, all right. In order to understand what's going to happen here when that $900 is lent out, I want you to consider, we're going to do a little aside here. And I'm going to show you what happens when people spend money, okay? All right, so let's say this $900 is lent out. One person borrows the $900 and they buy a television, okay? So $900 is spent, right? And it goes to a company that sells TVs, okay? So what's going to happen to that $900? Well, some of that money is going to go to the employees of the company, all right? And then that is their income. That is their income. So let's say of the $900, let's say $300, or let's say $400 goes to the employees as their income, okay? Then let's say $100, or let's say $200 goes to the owners as profit, okay, which, by the way, is also income. All right, so what we have here is of this 900, 400 plus 200, $600 of that money is now income for individuals, okay? Now, the other $300, let's say that, I don't know, let's say that $250 of it went to buy the TV because the company had to buy the TV from someone else before they could sell it. And then $50 went to basically overhead costs. Okay? Well, here's the thing about the overhead costs. The overhead costs are all going to other companies that provided services like rent or maybe pens and pencils or electricity or something, right? And so let's say that $50 that's going to a company, right? So that $50 is going to a company. This $250 where they had to purchase the TV that was sold, that also goes to a company, okay? So let's think of this whole thing as the $300 of the TV that was sold are going to other companies. So other companies that provided goods and services to the TV seller. Well, when those other companies get that $300, let's say about $200 of that money is going to their employees as income or owners as profit, and that's their income. The other $50 is going to go to some other company that provides supplies and overhead for these other companies. So that $50 is going to go to other companies. Now, what are those other companies going to do with that $50? Ultimately, what's going to happen is all of the money, let's say all $50 of that, is going to go to employees and owners. At some point or another, all of the money ultimately filters its way down so that it is either profit for owners or it is income for employees. All of it eventually goes there, because even if you're buying factors of production, even if you're buying parts from another company, that company is going to pay another company plus their employees. Well, the company they paid has to pay their employees, and their owners get some profit, and a little bit of that extra money goes to another company. Then that company has to pay their employees and their owners. Okay? Eventually, all money that is spent in the economy eventually becomes income for either an employee or for an owner. And so here's what winds up happening. Down here, the other companies, they paid all 50 to their employees and owners in income. These companies had 200 in income for their employees and owners. And then this company had 200 and 400 for their employees and owners. And what we have a total of is 400 and 200, 600, 700, 800, 850. We're missing something somewhere. So, this was supposed to be $100, not $50. Sorry. So 200 to employees because it was $300. 200 to employees, 100 to other companies. They pay employees and owners. So 100 plus 200 is 300, plus 200 is 500, plus 400 becomes 900. This $900 spent all eventually filters down and becomes income for individual households. And what those people do is they deposit that money into the bank. So this $900 that is lent out ultimately is either going to become a deposit for the business or it's going to become a deposit for an individual employee. But all $900 is going to be it's going to be spent, then it's going to be deposited into bank. What is lent is spent, okay? And so this $900 that's lent out, okay, the remainder is lent out to borrow, so we're going to lend out $900. That money, okay, what's lent is spent, and after it is spent, it's deposited into the recipient's bank, okay? So we're going to say here, what is lent is spent. The money lent is spent and then deposited. Where is it deposited? It's deposited into the recipient's bank. Okay, we're going to call that Bank 2. Okay, so we lent out $900. The person who borrowed it, they spent it. Whoever received it from there, employees and owners and businesses, they're now depositing it. They're going to deposit $900 in bank number 2. So now we have two banks involved. We have bank number 1 that received $1,000 and lent out $900. Now we've got bank 2 that's receiving $900, and they're going to loan out some money too. So this money that bank number 2 has just received in deposits, remember the required reserve is 10%. So bank number 2 has to keep back some of this money, right? So that bank keeps a fraction and lends the rest. That bank keeps a fraction and lends the rest. Okay? They keep 10% of it, right? And then they're going to lend out 90% of it. So they're going to hold $90 and lend $810. Okay? $90, which is 10% of 900. $90 held, $810 lent. Okay? All right, well, this $810 lent, what's going to happen to it? What's lent is spent. The money lent is spent and then deposited into the recipient's bank, okay? And so the next thing that's going to happen is, so that $810 will be deposited into Bank 3. Then Bank 3 will hold $81 because that's 10% of 810, and they will loan out $729. Okay? And this cycle, this chain reaction of lending and lending and depositing of money is going to continue. The cycle continues until the fraction becomes $0. I'll show you what I mean by that. All right, so do you see how this amount is getting smaller? I'm going to erase this here. So as you can see, the deposit with each iteration is going down, and also the money that is lent out is going down. So 1,000 deposited, next iteration 900 deposited, next iteration 810 deposited. As far as money lent out, we got 900 lent out, then 810 lent out, then 729 lent out. So this is what it's going to look like. We had $1,000 in an initial deposit. They held back 100 because it was 10% required. Then they lent out $900. That was spent and then deposited in another bank. So that's 900 deposited. That bank had to hold 90. They were able to loan out 810. That was eventually deposited in another bank, 810. They had to hold back 81. They were able to lend out 729. That 729 lent out was spent and deposited, 729. So you can see the number is decreasing. And if we were to add this together, 1,000 plus 900 plus 810 plus 729, whatever the next number is, it's going to be a smaller number. And they're eventually going to get smaller and smaller and smaller over maybe hundreds of lines until the last amount is 0. And what I want to tell you is this, is there's a way of calculating the total amount of deposited funds. And because deposited electronic money is included in the money supply, all of this money is now in the money supply. Initially, all we had was $1,000 in the money supply deposited into a bank. That $1,000 in currency has now become a lot of money in electronic money. And I can tell you that I know that the amount of money that this is going to add up to is $10,000. Now, the money that's being held back, here's the really neat part. The money that's being held back also reduces to 0 eventually, and that becomes 10% of the $10,000, which is $1,000. And so the total amount of money being held in reserve is equal to the initial deposit. And this is not by accident. And the reason I know that this is going to be $10,000 is because of a concept called the potential deposit multiplier. So what is this potential deposit multiplier? Well, I'm going to give you a definition. It is a mathematical factor. We're just going to say a factor. You know, a factor is a number that's multiplied by another number. That can be multiplied by an initial bank deposit. To calculate the maximum potential change in money supply. Resulting from the money creation process. And the formula for the potential deposit multiplier is 1 divided by the reserve ratio. So in this case, the potential deposit multiplier, you know, the reserve ratio is 10%, so the potential deposit multiplier is going to be equal to 1 divided by 0.10, because that's 10%. We have to turn it into a decimal. 1 divided by 0.10 is 10. And what you do is you take the potential deposit multiplier and then you multiply it by an initial bank deposit. Well, the initial bank deposit was 1,000, and 10 times 1,000 is 10,000. So here, the total effect on the money supply in this example is going to be $10,000, just like I showed you before when what I put in orange. Okay, that would be the total effect. And notice that 1,000 is 10% of 10,000. That's not by accident. Okay, so let's do a couple examples of calculating the potential deposit multiplier. All right, so let's say that the reserve ratio is 3.72%. And we want to know what the potential deposit multiplier is. Well, the potential deposit multiplier is going to be equal to 1 divided by the reserve ratio, which is 3.72%. I need to turn this into a decimal, so divide it by 100. That would be 0.0372. Now there will be a little box here, and we're going to put our answer in there. So 1 divided by 0.0372 is, we got 26, here's what I come up with, 26.88. 172043, right? Now we're going to go to 2 decimal places here, so that's right here. Our answer is going to be 26.88. Okay? All right, let's try another one. Let's say that the reserve ratio is equal to 7.91%. All right, so the potential deposit multiplier will be equal to 1 divided by 7.91%, which is 0.0791. I'll do 1 divided by 0.0791, and rounded to 2 decimal places is 12.64, okay? And that is how we calculate the potential deposit multiplier, okay? Now I want to do some examples of how we calculate the total effect on the money supply. Okay, let's say we know that the reserve ratio is 6.57%. And that there is an initial deposit of $15,400. Okay, and we want to know how much of a total effect there's going to be on the money supply and the money creation process. Well, what we're going to do is we need to do the potential deposit multiplier times the initial deposit. Okay? And so in this case, the initial deposit is $15,400. The potential deposit multiplier, now, this is going to be a little different than the potential deposit multipliers we just did. See, in those, we had to round our potential deposit multiplier because it was the final answer. It was the answer we were putting in the box. And we can round the answer we're putting in the box. But we don't ever round any numbers that are calculated before the number that's put in the box. So, when we do this, when we do 1 divided by 0.0657, and then we're going to multiply that times 15,400. Watch what's going to happen here. When we do 1 divided by 0.0657, we get 15.22070015. Okay? Now, we are not going to use 15.22. We are going to use the whole number because this is not the final answer. We're not putting this in the box. What we're putting in the box is the total effect on the money supply. That's what we want to know. The only answer that can be rounded is this one. So when we multiply by 15,400, we need to multiply this whole number, 15.22070015 times, it's already in my calculator, right? 15.22070015. I don't know if you can see that, but I can just hit times now. It's going to multiply that whole number times 15,400, and here's what I get. I get 234,398.7. So I'm going to go 399. I'm going to go to the nearest dollar, the nearest whole number. Now there would probably be a dollar sign out here, and so the total effect is going to be 234,399. And that would be the total effect on the money supply. Now if I had done 15.22, now it might be the same answer, but it might not be. Times 15,400. See, that was going to give me, if I had rounded this here and only done this number times this, I would get 234,388, and that would be a wrong answer. Okay? So do not round a number until you get to the final answer. Okay? So that is how you calculate the total effect. Calculate the potential deposit multiplier first, then multiply that number by the initial deposit, and that's how we find the total effect on the money supply in the money creation process. Now the last thing I want to talk about is called money destruction, which is basically money creation backwards. See, this happens, money creation happens when people deposit, have an initial deposit into a bank. But what happens when somebody withdraws money out of the bank? Well, that's going to cause this whole money creation process to work backwards, and the money supply, instead of increasing, it's going to decrease. All right, so money destruction is the decrease in money supply that results from the money creation process working backwards when money is withdrawn from a bank. And so it's the exact same process. It's based on the potential deposit multiplier. It's based on, instead of the initial deposit, now it's the initial withdrawal. So let's say that I tell you that the reserve ratio is 5.73%, and I tell you that there is an initial withdrawal of, let's say, $23,500. Okay, so the question is, how much will the money supply decrease? So now there will be less money in the economy because there's a withdrawal based on, in the fractional reserve banking system, triggering money destruction. Okay, and so we're going to need the potential deposit multiplier, which is going to be 1 divided by 0.0573, which is going to be 17.45200,698, and we're going to multiply that number times 23,500. And so the total effect, the number that we're going to put into the box, is going to be, now remember, we don't round this number, but we can round the answer. It's going to be 410,000. There's probably a dollar sign out here. 410,000, $122. We're rounding it to the nearest dollar. We're not going to put the pennies in. Okay? And so this is what it would look like if there was a box that you had to enter the number in. And understand, this total effect, this is a decrease because of money destruction. Decrease in the money supply. And that is the money destruction process. It is just simply the same thing as the money creation process, only working backwards. Okay? And all this is possible. This multiplication of money and increase and decrease in the money supply is because of the fractional reserve banking system that we have in the United States.